Hello, and welcome to the latest Get IT virtual conference. My name is Jason Wynn, and today's session we're going to be doing more around how do we get the most out of a Microsoft Teams, and how do we run a successful meeting and live event and webinar within Microsoft Teams. So, kind of very briefly, more about me. My name is Jason Wynn. I'm a Microsoft MVP and a principal technology strategist within Content and Cloud. I've been working the role now for almost 20 years within the IT business and IT industry, specialized particularly around video and collaboration and meetings. Very, very proud to have been part of Microsoft Teams from its conception 5 years ago, working within organizations now about how do we get the most around Microsoft Teams rooms and how do we get the most out of what we're doing within the entire space. So quite keen to walk you through everything that Microsoft's been working on around the meetings and how we apply these technologies through and how it's relevant to you. So this session, we're going to be working off a couple of things. The main things right now are how we're going to work together to either we're going to connect remotely to our colleagues or our business partners or other people's in the audience. And in this session, one, how we're going to choose the right event type, whether it's meetings or live events or within a webinar, and what the requirements are, some of the technical differences between them, and how do we get these things set up and running. So one of the key things around here as well is that hybrid events are absolutely here for us to stay. Um, and as we start moving things towards uh, brokering meetings and how we establish these things, as long as we have one attendee that's either in the office and one attendee that's working from a remote location, ultimately that becomes a hybrid meeting. So we could have a plethora of people, 100 people inside a meeting room or a meeting space or auditorium. And as these people work together, we realize that we may have attendees who are working and attending from home. Now that makes it a hybrid meeting space. And we're seeing a vast swathe of people doing this more and more often. However, the key thing to attribute here is that we are ultimately pushing the technology to its absolute limits, and that we are expanding what we're trying to do within this. And what I mean by that is, as you have people who are attending sessions and meetings outside of our usual workplace, so we're no longer sat around the boardroom table, but we still want to have parity within these things. So Microsoft has been investing a lot of time and effort in ensuring that meeting spaces and meeting places have the ability to have parity, regardless if I'm sat at home or if I'm sat in the meeting room, and in how we work. But meetings and how we meet is forefront within Microsoft Teams. So meetings ultimately are, we've got how kind of a different variety of way we work and within meetings themselves. And when the standard way we do this is a standard meeting. The standard meeting allows us to come in and they can accommodate up to 10,000 people. Now, this will grow up to 20,000, hopefully by the middle of the year. And what it allows us to do is have full interaction either via chat or webcams, microphones. It allows us to share and present that content to us. This is what we would have if we just send a standard Microsoft Teams invite via Outlook or via the Teams calendar, and I want to join people in. Now, as we grow and we build this content out, we may have meetings where they become quite unruly. They become up to 1,000 people. There's no possible way that we can stream and provide all that content through. So what Microsoft does is the first 1,000 people will enter as a view-only mode. And what that means is there's no interaction between the two. They purely can see and attend what's going on there. And likewise, we still have the ability to have PowerPoint Live and bring these things into it, but they don't have the ability to access the meeting from chat or see the shared web cameras and microphone from themselves. So that's one of the key points for the differences about meetings is we're obviously limited up to 1,000 people as a view only, but you can have up to 10,000 people attending remotely with no problem. And realistically, we're likely to see that number grow up to 20,000 by the end of before the middle of the year. We also have the ability that's come through is something called breakout rooms. So as I'm attending a meeting and I have the requirement to create a subset of the meeting to allow me or another person or however many people I want to be able to do it, I can go within the Microsoft Teams client, tell it that I want to join and then break out a breakout room. I can have a myriad of these things available to us. So a good place we might see these are um, academics who have breaking things into groups. And I can grow and I can go and grab however many groups. So if I have 10 people and I want two groups and five of each, I can do it automatically. Or I can say I want to have two groups, but five in each, and I can manually configure who goes in what group. And the good news about this is I can then allocate that information out and break those things out, and then we can return into what's going on in the main meeting. So breakout rooms is one of the new functionalities that's very, very powerful. Being able to get something from your meeting is important. So if I have a meeting and I want to see how people are working within that meeting, or I want to see who's actually attending and how people are attending, one of the first places I need to go to is within PowerShell. So this command that we've put in here, where it just says import the module, and we're applying Microsoft Teams, and we're connecting to Teams, and then we're setting the Microsoft policy to allow engagement reports, and we're then validating that that is run correctly. Now, what is this allowing this to do? So this is taking meetings to a whole nother level. What this allows us to do is get the reporting out of Microsoft Teams. So it allows me to go inside Teams itself and find out how many attendees were on there. It gives me information who attended, how many people attended, how long they attended for, how long were people joined up for, and the information that pulls out of these. And I can see what's actually happened within that meeting, and is very, very powerful. So I can find out whether or not the people were attending for 5 minutes or 5 hours. I can find out if people were attending and how long they were in for totally, and find out what roles people had within it. And we can output this out, and I'll show you in a moment that we can either pull this information within this screen within Microsoft Teams, or we can pull things out even more granularly via PowerShell or from PowerShell, but we can also import it into Excel. So this is an example of what we have within Excel, and this is the kind of root information, but we can take this and apply it out. So we can see how long a particular attendee has been recognized for. It gives me the ability to see what their telephone or their actual email addresses are and how they brought into the organization. It tells me whether they were again, we can find out if they were in the different breakout rooms or how they were working together as a team. And for that, it's very powerful for us to be able to see and pull that information within the Microsoft Teams Admin Center. Webinars. So webinars take things a bit further than a traditional Microsoft meeting. And what we do within that is webinars have the same features and limitations of meetings, but they include registration. And registration allows us to pull further information, so we can go and use that as either like a RSVP, so we can send the invites out and see what's happening within the organization and find out how people are attending. And within that as well, we can also query and find out if there's any additional details that people want to be able to find out. So we capture further details that we want to have, and then we can send this out to just people within our organization, or we can write this out to everyone within whomever, everybody we want to speak to, and we can force people to actually register before they join the meeting. So if we want to start a new meeting, what we ultimately do is we go to webinar within that. So that's the first point we do is click new meeting, we select webinar. The next step of what we do is we can choose who registers from where and how. And then we can go to that, and then we can edit the registration form. So the form is what's being sent to the people outside of organization. So we'll show that in a second, how people pull these things together within the actual piece, but we need to go and view and edit that form that's relevant to them. So we still put the same meeting details. We still put when the meeting was created and when it's for and how long it runs to, and whether or not we want to allow information in there, such as do we want to give them a heads up of when things are working and what day it is going to be, and people can import that information into the calendar. And then we can put information that's relevant to us that we want to get collateral out of it. So what we do within that is we can go and create some custom questions. We can say, we can pull more information. So we can ask what job role they have, or things that are relevant to what we may need to know. So if I'm sending information out to a restaurant, I may say, how many chefs do you have working for you? And how much information do you require around meeting spaces, or how do you plan on working collaboratively as a new and upcoming firm? How do you plan on doing these things? And then lastly, what we do, and once we finish setting up the form itself and make sure we upload any sort of custom information we want in there, so we can upload our own images and we can upload whatever things that are relevant to us. And then within that as well, we can also identify speakers and who's speaking within it, and we can put a biography in it, and we can outline that out who's going to be speaking. So we want to tailor that webinar to be very, very conducive of providing the information that we think that the viewers and attendees are going to see that are ultimately relevant to them. So they may say, so in this case, we're talking about a restaurant. In this case, we may say Chef Gordon Ramsay is going to be speaking about something about how they're getting the most of your employees. So that would be a good example here. What we could do within the webinar information is then put that speaker detail and biography within creating that webinar as well. Once we have that, we are able to then go and see what's going on with it. So we wrote our webinar, and it's a huge success, and we wanted to see what is happening within it. We're now able to download the registration pack. We can download attendance, and we can follow up with the people who have provided that information with it as well, so we can see what's relevant to them. So we may be able to follow up with them and say, thank you very much for attending. It's been wonderful to see you. We hope you got a lot out of our restaurateurs, and we hope that you have a lovely time. And here's our more details about us and more details about how we can provide assistance, and very generic. However, the attendee and the attendance record and the registration record tell us who's actually signed up and who's actually been and how long for. So if we can output that out, then we can see that people are joined in, when they left, how long they were actually on the webinar for, and what their email addresses are, or the UPNs, and what's going on with it. In addition to that, you can see which industry they've actually joined from if they input that information. So that's the information that we've asked them, what's relevant to us, and we can import that information into that as well. So we can see who, what, where, and why they've attended, and whether or not those things are relevant to us. Because ultimately what we're trying to do now is utilize this as a method of capturing the content and being able to utilize it for something. So in this case, we could say that Dev has been a healthcare professional, and within that vertical, it's really, really relevant to us, and that's a very buzzworthy item that we want to look into right now. We can then go and tailor our webinar content to be for devs going forward, because we had a huge amount of information coming in within that, and we have a lot of information for healthcare, and we were trying to push that content going out forward, and we could tailor the future webinars for that because we've had the interest in it. Live events are ultimately a method of grabbing the information and broadcasting it through. And it's only for the purpose of broadcasting the information, that there's no audience interaction other than a optional Q&A methodology that we have within it. And ultimately, people can go and they can see it, we can record it, we can broadcast it later, we can integrate this into a whole method of different ways of working that we have, so we can go and grab the output and put it into Microsoft um, Teams, or we could put it into YouTube, or we could upload this content into a LinkedIn event. We can grab it and put this content wherever we want it within it. And again, we have a cap currently of about 100,000 people that can attend on the first run. But in reality, this is scaled to indefinite. And live events historically were used for for many years now, and that Microsoft helped roll this out and develop some of the information for the Olympics. So some of the Olympics historically were being broadcast via the same technology that we use within live events to be able to push that information. So how do we create a live event? Again, we go in, we select the live event from the drop-down menu, and then within that, we can go and do exactly the same thing as well. So we can see what's relevant to us and who's done what. We can join the conference. We can have chat. Because we're the organizer, we have the ability to see the Q&A report. We can find out which attendees were actually involved in seeing and doing what we wanted to be able to do. And then we can go and find out whether or not recordings are within the actual event or not. And here's an example as well, so we can see that we've had some questions. So people asking how to become a presenter or whatever it may be, and how they're actually joining and what the endpoint is and what their full names are. And again, what their participant ID is. So that normally is going to be their email address to be able to contact them, have feedback, and understand how and what they're going to be doing within it. So we want to be able to pull all this content back through. And the key thing about a Microsoft Live event is to remember that it is a broadcast. This information that's being published through will utilize different ways of doing it than a traditional meeting. This is absolutely going to be a way of how we're going to be providing the solution to people rather than a multi-way of giving and taking information. We're broadcasting it through. So we're going to have different roles. So we're going to have the role of an organizer, and we're going to have a presenter, and ultimately it's going to work a bit like a news studio where you have different people within it. So one person can orchestrating the content that's on the screen, and the next person can be organizing which camera it's going to be coming into. We can organizing the information to allow all these things to be played through different ways to be able to provide the best visual impact to it. So you could switch between the slides, you could switch between what's available within that, switch to a different camera, whilst the person presenting is just concentrating on providing the presenting information and being able to have that flow. And likewise, you can have a team of people behind the scenes also grabbing that information and putting it through. So if you have a Q&A, so in this we're grabbing this information and we're asking how do people pull that all that content in, we can go and capture all that as well. So we have people who may be a event team leader that are organizing that information and publishing it through, and we can analyze it and find out what's relevant to us. And we can see who's asked the really, really good questions and who's asked some silly ones like this one by bringing donuts. How do I become a presenter? So how do we go and grab all that information and push it through that's relevant to us? So to getting the most out of your live events, being able to capture the content and being able to reflect that later is absolutely key to us. So one of the ways that we need to be mindful of is that Teams by default have some restrictions on what we do with our policies. So if we want to be able to see what's going on with the engagement reports, what somebody showing you just recently, is that we want to be able to turn that on first. So you need to go into your Teams Admin Center under Policies and turn that on. Likewise, by default, who can register is not set to everyone. It's set to within everyone brackets in my domain or my tenant. And that only allows the people to see what's going on and who can register within the meetings natively. So if you wanted to reach us out to the larger group, then you could do so. So if you can see from this, I'm looking at the global policy that you can see at the top. So I said everybody in my organization could create a meeting and anybody can register to it and anybody can join it. Now, that may not be how you want your organization to work. There may be times where you want to lock this down, or there's people within your organization who don't have the requirement to be able to create these things, in which case you would definitely not use the global. You would create a subset policy for it, assign the right rules to those things that you want to be able to do, and then obviously allow those people to go and create and schedule those meetings however you want. In addition to that, there may be times where you don't want people to be able to pull the event reports and engagement reports, so you would turn that to turn off. Or you may set that we don't want everybody to go and have a webinar registration. We just want to be able to just run meetings as well. So policies and meeting policies is where you would go to ultimately lock these things down. But what if you wanted to be able to run a meeting, but you want to be able to see how things are working and functioning as calls are working? So what we would do again is with the Teams Admin Center, we go within the user side of things, so we know somebody's presenting or within a meeting, and we could drill down into meetings and calls. And so this is an example where I was in a call earlier today, and I wanted to join in. So I joined a call, and there's two participants within it, and I wanted to see how these calls were working. So I can see there that the call in flight right there is in a conference. It's in progress. I can see how many people are working it, and this is real time. So I can see real time who's in what conference, who's in what meeting, and how people are working it collaboratively. More important than this, I can see what's happening with it as well. So I can see when people join the meeting, I can see how many of the participant status, I can find out how things were working. And again, I can drive down to what's happening as well. So I can see that I joined this meeting from a meeting bar A30 and is running this particular, it's got this IP address and where it's been located from, and I can start drilling down to what the quality of that is as well. So if you have a meeting that's absolutely essential within your organization and you want to ensure that things are working absolutely seamlessly and you want to make sure that the audio stream is working exactly how I want to, that inbound and outbound conferencing are absolutely perfect. Likewise, if we scroll down from this screen, I can see exactly how it's working within the organization to be able to provide things like um, my video, any sort of content sharing, and being able to validate that this content is being to the best ability that it can be, then I can do so too. And I can see real time and get the status of all those things that are happening. Another key point here is that we have the ability to start developing for it. So in this instance, we have the Microsoft Teams API and SDK updates for Teams meetings. And the place to go to find the latest information within that is the aka.ms Teams apps in meetings. And what it allows us to do is to pull Microsoft Teams as the platform itself. And it allows us to break into quite a lot of really, really interesting things. So we could do all the reporting that we normally have within Microsoft Graph. And so we could pull out and analyze all the detail that are happening with it. In addition to that, we have the ability to pull and find adaptive cards and tabs, start playing bots. You may have to requirements where you have to utilize a bot to allow information in and out of your Microsoft Teams meeting to go into a third-party solution. And that would be the case, and that's how you would do it, is to utilize bots for those type of things. It also gives us the ability to pull upon things such as in-meeting information, where we've seen a subset of that being already been reported by Microsoft, but we can go and update our own information, our own tools within it, and to be able to validate and understand what's actually happening. We could create webhooks and connectors. So if we wanted to tie in a Microsoft Teams meeting and publish it to a different system entirely, we have the ability to do that. So we can grab the information within Microsoft Teams and apply it out to a third-party solution to be able to integrate that in to their own native solution. In addition, we have the ability to utilize Power Apps and messaging extension and task modules. So as the information is being flowed into Microsoft Teams, we can analyze it, report back, and utilize the APIs and SDKs to be able to push and receive that information through to Teams. So that's all really, really useful. But how does this tie into the grand scheme of things of what we're trying to achieve and trying to publish through to Microsoft? So one of the key pieces that we have is that we have an attendance cap. So up to recently, when Microsoft Meetings had the ability to publish up to 20,000 people, and we're going to see that grow as of June 30th of 2022. But up to now, participants up to 1,000 people obviously have full integration. We're going to see that grow up to 20,000, but they're only going to have view only for within that. But the key thing here is that registration is not supported for meetings. So meetings are scheduled or ad hoc. They allow us to tie into different components within Microsoft Teams, so we can tie into things like in a moment. What we'll see is how we apply different modalities to those meetings to be able to do it. Webinars, again, we're going to have the same limitations up to 1,000 people with view-only capability, and the audience interaction is configurable with the webinar. So within that, we can set those policies to say that we don't want people to be able to allow them to do their cameras or audio, and we're not overly keen on allowing people to chat, and we can scale that accordingly to be able to do it. And then the lastly, live events, which is basically a large broadcast, and it has a heavily moderated Q&A ability to be able to do it. And we can then go and tell who's a producer and who's a presenter, and also excluding um, all the external presenters, or we can include them in, and we can start being able to tailor that accordingly to be able to scope the profiles that we want to apply to the right level of meeting that's being sent out. So we can, as people who are creating the live event, we can scale that back. In addition to that, if we don't want people to have the ability to scale that information to and fro, we may want to regulate it as an organization. We can start leveraging policies to regulate all these attributes. So we can say that we don't want people outside of our organization to have the ability to have their cameras on, or the ability to have participation other than a view only. And we can start applying those policies to teams. And again, this could be set as a organization, or we can start pulling things through to how it applies to the particular lines of business, and we can start applying these things through to different areas or different sub areas of our businesses altogether to be able to do and provide the right level depending on what they're allowed to do around governance, or what they're allowed to do around different parts of the business, or is there any sort of ethical walls in which we need to provide around to prevent them for bringing in or sharing or having further information outside of our organization. We can start regulating these things through. So meeting chat is again important for some. The key areas here is that Microsoft Meetings and webinars gives us the ability to have chat, and they also give us the ability to have chat to the first 1,000 people. But obviously, this stops working and stops being a thing after that. So people won't see what's being said and won't see what's going to be being presented, because we're only allowing that information out for the first 1,000 people. So when you have a seriously large conference or a hyper event, then obviously this becomes an issue where we need to make sure that the people who are actually presenting are presenting the right information. In addition to this, it also gives us the ability to do such thing as raise your hand for questions, or being able to give supporting clap, or those type of integrations that we have within Teams to tell people what you're thinking, or what you're thinking about, or sending the little emojis that have hearts, so that way the presenters who are presenting at that point in time can actually understand what's happening, how people are doing, and how the integration within the two. And then what's also key within that as well is that live events allows for no chat. It allows for Q&A, but it's very tailored and curated Q&A that is very dependent upon what we do. So as we set up the live events, we can configure where we're obtaining that Q&A information, and then we can start rolling that type of functionality out to people to be able to do it. Now, there's something I should probably broach now, is that when you're running these live events, they are managed and maintained completely different from any way. They're not like a meeting where you can jump in and jump out of a meeting as a presenter and it works. When you are the producer of a live event, once you start it, it is started, and if you stop it, it is finished. There's no starting back up a live event. And I've seen that people get caught out of that before. So when you bring people into a live event and they're the producer and they've run it and they started, and something happens and you stop and you cease it, it will cease the live event entirely. So there's a bonus for you, for those of you who are running live events. Don't stop it after you started it unless you truly mean to stop it. Attendees can obviously share content within their microphones or webcams. Again, this is attendees rather than the presenters or the producers or the people who are presenting within it. Uh, so we can have two-way conversations with meetings, and we can have two-way conversation with webinars. But obviously, it's again a broadcast for live events, so we don't have the ability to see and understand and be part of those conversations when we're doing a broadcast or a live event. Because other than the Q&A, because the Q&A allows us to bring those conversations in. So we need to understand again, this is only for the first 1,000 people, and that's how ultimately what we'll do is the chat and again, we can tailor this down to policy and down to different parts of our organization to do it. So if we have the understanding that we have, um, again, so we wanted to be able to bring the overall meetings in, and we wanted to bring around the microphones, but we don't want particular parts of our business to use a microphone. We can then separate that functionality out. Or if we wanted people to have it in a meeting but not in a webinar, then we can create a policy that then separates that functionality out. So when we send out that webinar, we may say, I don't want people to have their microphones on, or I don't want people to unmute themselves, or I'm forcing people to have interaction with us. So I'm going to say, start your video camera on by default, but you can't go and mute. And so a good use of this would be is if you're a teacher and you're doing a meeting and you're having a session with your students, the last thing you want to be able to do is have your actual students go and mute the teacher. And I've seen that at a couple of academics where they've pushed this information through to their students, and this happened at the beginning of the pandemic where we have students who were going and joining meetings and ultimately disabling the removing the teacher from the meeting, removing the ability for them to mute, or forcing a mute upon the teacher, which is slightly embarrassing because they realize they're still part of the session, but they didn't lock down the meeting creation, so anybody can mute and anybody can lock down. And so these things are all being created for the ability of the organization or for the school to be able to lock that content down. So that way we don't have to think about, as presenters, we shouldn't have to think about the students locking me out of my own session, or think about how I'm going to create a meeting to be able to force it so that way the students don't mute me whilst I'm giving a lecture or whatever else within it. So that's key, is that when we create these things, we have different requirements. So we may have the requirements for the teachers to have the ability to create a session that goes and sends it out so it's one way. But me as the head of IT or the CTO of an organization or however that may work, I may have a different set of requirements. So that's when we could use policies to create the right environment for for the work in which we're doing. Again, we can pull these things through again. So if we look at the types of meetings, um, we want to be able to just share. So we can see that all of them have the ability to present the screen share. And so here I was in a meeting earlier today, and I grabbed the screen. I want to be able to share it. So this made me limited down to I can share multiple screens, I can share multiple content, I can share a myriad of information all at once. I might have the requirement just to share a particular part of a screen, or I can say I only want people to see a particular component of what I want them to see. So it may be an application on the screen that only resides on part of it. So again, I can share that information out and be quite selective about what I want to see and share out. Now, when we share out this information, it's going to ultimately change in the layout of how our screens look. So I'll no longer have my traditional screen where I have the ability to see the people. It will change things, the layout of what we're doing within this screen as well. Now, this ties us on to some future state things that we've been looking at in the last 3-4 months. One of these things is called front row. Now, front row will allow Windows devices and Microsoft Teams rooms to have the ability to see the content in which you're sharing in focus. So that'll be the primary item. And then what you see below that soon is the ability to see all the attendees who are in the meeting as well. So within that screen share, I can see who's still attending, see who's still present, see the faces of the people within the room. In addition to that, I'll have the ability to see what chats are going on and what type of interactions happening, who has their hands raised and such. So it's very, very important for us to understand that the content share is really, really important. In addition to that, I'll also be able to see within it as well. So if you go to, I believe it's called the debugging section of Microsoft Teams, what you could do is click on the top and grab the information. You can see call information, and that call information gives us the ability to see how much we're using of our screen share. So it tells me how much video I'm actually sending. So it's called VBSS, so video-based screen sharing, and I can see what's happening in the content that's being sent out and what type of rate people are receiving it by. Within that as well, I can see how good my video, my call quality, my network quality is to within the actual call itself. So within those type of things, is really really important to see that I can share my content. I can still understand that my content takes priority. Attendees have the ability to go and swap around what's important to them. So they may say that I can go and take the I understand what's on the slide decks potentially or what application is being shared, but I may want to find out. I want to see the presenter again, so as the attendee, that's under 1,000 people. I have the ability to go and grab that and change that around to what's relevant to what I want to see. In addition to that, I may want to be able to see utilize something called PowerPoint Live. So from PowerPoint itself, I have this button now which says Presenting Teams. And what that allows me to do is to tie that all in to utilize Teams integration and PowerPoint. And obviously, Microsoft Teams team released that separately from Office, but we're seeing more and more integration points within it. In addition to that, what we're seeing now is within Teams, if I hover over a particular application on my taskbar now, it'll tell me, do I want to present this to Teams? And I can, without even being in a meeting, I can go and grab onto it, hover over, and it tells me, do I want to bring that into the Microsoft? So as I'm in a meeting, I could go and hover over application. I can present that content out immediately. And the idea here is to be able to streamline it into things that are much easier to be able to do. I can bring that content in even faster within my actual meeting information and share it out seamlessly. So whether or not I have the ability to provide registration. So Teams, as I said, or meetings allow me to bring that information out quickly. I can bring it out so that way it's sent out, and it's very much a back and forth of information, but I can create a meeting that is just up to 10,000 people and send and share that link, and that link that I have that way I send out is relevant to them. Webinars allows me to take the actual content that we have and share that information out even further. But I can demand that people update the information that I have for them, or obtain information I want to have for them, or ask high level questions before they attend it. I can create a bespoke web link to be able to have them see what's going on and understand what's relevant to them, and curtail how I'm going to present that webinar ultimately by the feedback I have from those RSVPs. So for that, it allows me to see more and more detail about what's going to happen. And then live events as well. It says this built-in registrations are not supported. But however, with live events, you can go and you can grab that further information and tie it into those APIs that we have and those SDKs, and I can tie that live event in and publish that information, and I can broadcast that information over Azure Media Services, but I can then go and also send out my own wrap around it that grabs the information I want to have. In addition to that, it allows me to tie those things into things like that question, that Q&A form that I have to be able to pull that content in. And then we have the moderated participation. So within meetings and within webinars, they have the ability to use chat and webcams and microphones, and we can then restrict that content down and bring it down. So ultimately, by default, it's wide open. However, that may be not relevant to what we're trying to achieve. May be too much. It may be farther than what we want to do, and we restrict that down by a policy. But however, live events, Q&A can be toggled on and off, and we can start to make sure the attendees cannot share they don't have the ability to share their webcam because they're only as an attendee. Only the producers have the ability to have the presenters present that information. And again, we have the ability as a producer to go and toggle and present that information however we want and start bringing it all back together again. And then obviously the Q&A functionality allows us to pull that into as well. So we have meetings have the ability to ask questions. We have the ability to pull that together. So just the same as within a webinar or within a meeting, I can chat, I can have those questions, I can have feedback, I can raise my hand. I have very, very much a two-way communication. What we mean by this is that we, within the Q&A function, is that it is nobody else can see the fact that I'm asking the question. They can only see that I can only see the information come to me. Likewise, you can maybe presenting a live event where the actual presenters who are presenting are not there. We may be presenting information that has been pre-recorded and being streamed out live, and I want to capture the questions that come in, and then we can field those questions accordingly however we want, however we feel fit afterwards. So what do you need to have to get Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Live Events and Microsoft functionality working as a webinar? And the key thing over here around that is we need the ability to utilize Teams itself. So anybody without a license can join a meeting. You don't need to have any license. You don't need to have a Microsoft account. You just need the ability to click on a link and join via web or join via a feature-rich client to be able to do so. But you don't need a license to attend. Now, if you want to attend from a business perspective and create, so the key thing here is that you need a license to create those meetings. You need to be able to do it. So you need to be able to have the right level within that. And so what we've done with this is we've written an ebook that ties into this that tells you exactly what licenses you need to have to be able to provide that content through. And it tells you whether you need a E1 or E2 or E3 or E5, or whether or not you need to be able to have a A1 or A3 license to be able to pull all that the conversations together around what functionality you need to have. Again, do I need a business essentials or do you need to buy an enterprise? And the answer is we need to look to understand what functionality you're trying to achieve out of it to tailor that conversation around what level of licensing is required. So again, my name is Jason Wynn. Thank you very, very much for attending the conference. Hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thank you.